When we did our introductions to each other as fellows the first day, I told this story about my childhood that seemed to resonate with a lot of my fellows. So I figured I'll tell it again in case you forgot. But this time in an abridged version, and I think why that story is important is more also because of what it means for the role of what I would consider the developed world in this our commonwealth, which is the globe. I grew up in Aba, Nigeria, which is in eastern Nigeria, and it was a village. My grandfather had 3 wives. I guess he was a ladies' man. And as a result, 15 children, one of whom was my dad, and then what is maybe 60 or so grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And I was one of them. But the setup of that place was such that we didn't really have rigid lines of parenting. So even though you knew your parents, you didn't really belong to them. So I have countless nights sleeping in uncles and aunts' houses. Every cousin was brother, sister, and there was this sort of collective responsibility that we had for each other. And I thought that was how the rest of the world worked, until I ventured out of that place to the city, Lagos, for high school, and I saw all these nuclear families. Even though, of course, I wasn't uneducated or unexposed to know what the real world was, but my childhood and upbringing had a major effect on me. And I would say that the US, I see, in a sense, as being like me, having advanced so far compared to the rest of the globe, but still belonging to this village that is our commonwealth, and for which there is a sense of collective responsibility that we have. And I applaud the Eisenhower Fellowships for recognizing this before it became an emergency. 70 years ago, it wasn't an emergency. Nobody cared. You didn't have to think about globalizing, creating leaders, bringing people together to understand each other, to be responsible for each other, and to help each other grow along this sort of path of collective development. You didn't have to do it 70 years ago, but you did. And here we are today, when it is a crisis, when it is an imperative, when we are not listening to each other, like George said, when we are fighting each other, when trade wars are happening, labor wars are happening, we are all insular. When Africa, the continent, which here we could say has been a victim of slavery and all other things, is way behind and is causing existential migrations that is putting pressure on Europe. We can't escape the collective problem that we have created. We can't escape the perennial poverty that plagues all of us. And with the world becoming more interconnected, crime. How many of you have gotten the Nigerian emails? Don't pretend you don't know them. Exactly. You have the emails of the Nigerian princes. There are so many of them. But I will tell you that this is not a question of them versus us. It's a question of a collective responsibility that we all should have, because we will become victims of a world that we do not make peaceful, prosperous, and just. And the pressure that we feel today as a globe was the foresight that the Eisenhower Fellowship had 70 years ago. And I'm just happy to be in it when I don't have to explain myself or explain why this is important. And so my project, you've seen what I do for a living, so I'm not going to talk about that much. But my project is still around this idea of creating shared prosperity, taking many people out of poverty so that they do not have to resort to crime, that they do not have to resort to underprivilege or to underdevelopment or to not realizing their full potential. And I feel the same way about women. I feel the same way about underrepresented communities. We have a responsibility to each other to make each other achieve our fullest potential. And so my project is really around training the next generation of software engineers, Web 3.0 developers, people who will be in themselves subject matter experts that build technology for the rest of the world. And it's quite serendipitous that we are in a universe where, at least up until recently, when our friends at Google and Facebook started laying everyone off, until recently, there has been 30 million developers, and 30 million, the size of the scale of the lack of technology talent, or the demand of technology talent, was in the scope of 30 million people. I believe we're going to get back to that. And I believe technology is just really here to eat the world, software. And we want to participate in that global ecosystem for the reason of bringing everyone along on this journey of shared prosperity. But I believe that until we can solve the problem of the underdeveloped world, it is impossible to create a world that is peaceful, prosperous, and just. And I thank you very much for making me a small part of this journey to that destination. Thank you.